I'm Ruth Barnett, 35, and I'm standing at the mic in a crowded banquet hall as the projector obeys me, not them. Casey, the wedding MC, freezes mid-step as the slideshow switches to my files and audio waveform bars. Mark, my brother, drops his champagne. Olivia, the bride, reaches for his arm. Dad stops clapping. Mom stops smiling. Daniel, my ex-husband, laughs once, then his face drains when the bank's message flashes. Funding freeze due to public controversy. Ben, the chief financial officer, presses his lips together. Victor, Daniel's fixer, reaches for his phone and finds no signal. Nora, my tech ally, cut the network for 10 minutes. We'll do this clean, I say, and the room goes silent as the recording of Daniel's own voice begins to play. Before I tell you how I built this moment and why my own family tried to shame me on a wedding stage, tell me where you're listening from. Comment your city, subscribe, and switch on notifications for more family revenge stories. I read every single one. I learned early that my job was support, not spotlight. Mom and Dad taught me to be useful. Dad praised outcomes, the trophies, the contract wins, and barely noticed the sweat behind them. Mom praised compliance. She rewarded me for keeping my mouth shut and my spine soft. Help your brother shine, they said, as if that were a motto carved into the kitchen table. Mark got the speeches, the extra seconds on the porch at dinner, the backslaps. My birthdays blurred into the background of Mark's celebrations. He gave the speeches, people cheered for his future, and my slice of cake was cut early so the program could move on. I learned to anticipate needs before anyone asked, to patch crises quietly, to absorb blame like a sponge. My wins were nice, spoken in a voice that suggested smallness. I polished other people's reputations until they shone. That made me reliable and invisible. It made me easy to direct. It made me later prey. Daniel arrived like a solution. He was smooth in a way that looked like competence, not cruelty. He listened with the kind of attention that pretended to be love. He mirrored my phrases and repeated them in a tone that convinced Dad he was a man of reason. Mom liked that he understood our family, which was family code for he understands how things look. At first, his corrections were small, a clarification about my schedule, a helpful rewording of a text I meant to send. He praised my sacrifices in public while never asking what I actually needed. He mirrored my confidence until I let it sit where my voice used to be. He learned my patterns, the places where I could be nudged. Within months, he knew where I kept empathy like cash in a drawer and where I hid passwords. He treated helpfulness like an investment, and I foolishly let him manage the returns. He built control the way other people build a resume, one clean move at a time. He framed joint accounts as temporary consolidations and called budget decisions plans that didn't need my approval. He set up auto-pays I couldn't see, rerouted statements to a folder I never opened, and labeled cards for emergencies he defined on his terms. When the credit notifications appeared, he called them minor vendor issues and told me to stop worrying. He used calm language to turn my objections into temper tantrums, his voice the authority and mine the overreaction. He moved money slowly and invisibly, like water finding a new channel. When I finally noticed the leaks, the trail of receipts and confirmations led back to him, but by then he held the keys and the story about why things happened. He made manipulation look like management. Lily changed everything. When she was born, he started calling the small decisions optimizations and my instincts sentiment. He suggested childcare plans with spreadsheets and called breastfeeding an inefficient shift. The day he called Lily a negotiation chip, I stopped trusting him with words. I took a lawyer's card out of my purse and kept it folded for nights I couldn't sleep. When I left with a car seat, a duffel bag, and a credit score that felt like it had been punched. The divorce papers included a mutual non-disparagement and a non-disclosure clause with a liquidated damage figure that looked engineered to make me afraid to speak. I learned to document everything: texts, receipts, the time he admitted he had access to our joint accounts. I learned one-party recording laws in my state and how to keep copies of court orders. I started to keep a binder. Custody papers, the non-disclosure, notices, scripts for service. I taught Lily code words and exit routes before she could tie her shoes. I promised her out loud that if anyone ever tried to use us as leverage again, we would not argue about it. We would act. They sanitized Daniel's memory in stages. First, the sharp edges were filed down, then the story was softened to a complicated chapter we all learned from. People who once yelled at him in our kitchen now offered him advice about deals and contracts. I watched them invite him to dinners, to board meetings, to fundraisers. They wanted a clean narrative, a family that forgave, a son who regained footing, a daughter who learned grace. I learned to stop telling the whole story. Every time I tried, a small look from Mom or a distracted smile from Dad would cut me short. I was expected to be the daughter who kept things together without making waves. So I started keeping things in writing instead of conversation. I took notes, I saved messages, I wrote the dates down with little ticks on a page. The record comforted me in a way their words never did. I rebuilt my life on small, steady steps. I took a job as an operations analyst at a mid-size property management firm. The work suited me. Processes, contracts, and risk felt like puzzles I could solve with patience. I learned to read balance sheets the way I used to read people, looking for inconsistencies, for tiny places where water seeped through. Nora became my tech ally. She taught me about metadata, how files hold their own histories, and why you never delete a record you might need later. Together, we made digital hygiene a habit: separate accounts, strong passwords, and two-factor authentication. I opened a new P.O. box and moved burner documents there. I built an emergency fund in a bank account no one knew about. I kept a small retainer with Aaron, an attorney who agreed to be on call. He was practical and calm and used plain English when he talked to me about options. Therapy was slow work, but it gave me a spine that didn't have to ask permission to exist. I practiced saying the word no in front of a mirror until it felt like a real sound coming out of me. I also kept a binder. Paper holds weight in a way a cloud sometimes doesn't. In it were custody papers, the non-disclosure agreement from the divorce, documented threats, scripts for service, and copies of anything Daniel or his people ever used to try to scare me. I labeled things plainly: dates, times, who said what. It felt ridiculous to be so meticulous, but those pages were boundaries I could read when their voices blurred. Quiet money and quiet work gave me space to plan without panic. I did not want to be seen rebuilding, I wanted to be ready. Even as I rebuilt, small invasions kept happening. Mom accidentally looped Daniel into a family email about a fundraiser and then said oops, as if the mistake were a household appliance failing. Dad would tell me to be civil right before a charity event where Daniel was scheduled, without warning me he'd be there. Mark floated the idea of hiring Daniel for a short consulting call and looked at me like it was a logistics question, not a betrayal. Each time they framed it as normal, as if thinking of my safety was melodrama. They gaslit me with kindness. We're all adults now, they would say, or we're trying to keep things practical. The message was clear: my discomfort was the problem, not their choices. I started countermeasures the way you prepare for a storm you know is coming. I taught Lily a few code phrases, words that meant exit now or stay put, so she could react without understanding the full danger. We practiced routes out of crowded rooms. I had signals with Nora, and I kept a small clutch ready with copies of critical documents. I rehearsed leaving a room without making a scene. How to slide my phone into a pocket, how to angle the camera to catch faces, how to breathe in a way that kept my voice steady. I also began to test the boundaries of what people would do when faced with proof. My plan was never reckless. I ruled out illegal acts and physical confrontations because I couldn't risk Lily's safety or custody. My aim was to be methodical, not theatrical. The vow I made to Lily and to myself was simple: never be ambushed again. I wrote templates, demand letters, preservation notices, complaint drafts in plain language so that anyone could read them and understand the stakes. I registered a handful of domains where I parked timelines and documents. Not live, just reserved. I pre-wrote an explainer of the non-disclosure clause that spelled out what breaking it would cost, line by line, in dollars and practical consequences. Aaron agreed to keep ready-to-file PDFs that he could e-file on a moment's notice. I scoped a short list of ethical investors who might step in if Mark ever needed a rescue without Daniel. I met a few quietly gauged interest and kept them at arm's length until they were useful. My binder moved with me like armor. I practiced neutral, three-sentence responses so I wouldn't be baited into a fight. Most of all, I promised Lily, if it happens again, we don't beg for understanding. We don't wait for them to do the right thing, we act. Lily squeezed my hand, her fingers small and warm, and whispered, "Mom, we need to leave now." She didn't say it like a child making a whim. She said it like someone who'd been taught to name danger. I leaned closer and she held up a phone, the screen soft in the dim. A vendor stream was live from the prep room, one of those behind-the-scenes feeds the couple's coordinator had set up so distant relatives could watch. In the corner of the shaky video, Daniel sat at the family table, relaxed as if he'd been invited without consequence. He laughed at whatever someone said, leaning back with a hand over the back of the chair, the way men do when they assume their presence changes nothing. The chat beside the feed scrolled, "Big investor in the house, cross capital." Someone tagged a contractor page and someone else typed a fire emoji. The image was small but clear enough. Daniel at ease, Mom nodding at him, Dad offering a polite smile. I felt the room tilt. I called to myself the things I'd practiced: steady breath, slow voice. I told Lily low and certain, "Stay with me. We don't run, we reposition." Her eyes were wide, but she nodded as if she'd been waiting for that instruction. I slipped the phone into my pocket, the little weight a tiny, dangerous stone against my thigh, and I moved toward the corridor where I could talk to Mom and Dad without drawing attention. They had installed peace like a lamp, easy to switch on and expect everyone else to live in the softened glow. I found Mom near the powder room, smoothing her dress, hair pinned precisely. Dad was at her elbow, a champagne flute angled like a shield between them and the room. I said the words without drama. I saw Daniel on the stream. My voice did what it had learned to do in tense rooms, steady, even. Mom's smile was practiced before it broke. "Your brother has worked hard to make peace," she said, as if she were reading a line from a script written for soothing. "Don't ruin his day." Dad added like a footnote to her line, "We all have to move on, Ruth." The words landed on me like a physical shove. It was suddenly plain how they'd dressed this as generosity. I asked quietly, "Was I warned?" Mom's mouth pinched. Dad looked past me at someone else as if he needed to borrow a neutral face. They had not warned me. They had made a choice without me, and now they asked me to be content with their decision. My body registered it as a sale, a handshake over a ledger where my life, my pain, my history had been priced and exchanged for another kind of calm. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I had already rehearsed the better course. I would watch, I would gather. I would hold the record of this moment like a lit match in my hand. A half door away, voices pooled and dropped into a private cadence I could almost, but not quite, keep out of earshot. Ben, the chief financial officer, was talking numbers in a clipped tone that made everything sound sterile: burn rate, receivables, past due payables. Mark's voice threaded through, pitched with optimism that didn't touch the figures Ben read. I edged closer and heard the phrase that made my stomach tighten: convertible note with warrants. Someone mentioned a valuation painted in warm terms, but the actual math sounded thinner than the gloss. The papers in Ben's hands had columns I could read. They did not match the rhetoric. A line about a morals clause caught my eye, the kind of clause that gets used like a guillotine if a scandal shows up. I saw Victor, Daniel's fixer, step in like a shadow and say, "We stick the landing tonight, no noise." His voice was low, practiced, the plan stitched together in my head. The wedding was a stage, the family table a prop, the speeches a script to be fed at the right moment to investors watching for risk to vanish. The more I listened, the clearer it became that Daniel's presence wasn't a sentimental olive branch. It was a public display designed to extinguish questions about liability and reputational risk. They wanted the optics of reconciliation, the photograph that said he's family again, and a closed-mouth world where inconvenient facts were buried under champagne flutes. My throat went dry not from anger but from the cold precision of what they were doing. They were canonicalizing him, converting his presence into a risk suppression device. I catalogued names, phrases, nerves, Ben's hands trembling a fraction, Victor's jaw tight, files forming in my head like exhibits. This was a performance engineered to purchase a financial outcome, and the currency was my history. I hit record on my phone the way I had been taught, one-party consent, the law on my side. My hand didn't tremble. I held the phone under my palm and let the red dot be a private witness. He smiled as if confessing was charity. "Congratulations to your brother. I'm a family man too," he said, watching for the offset in my face. He tossed a name into the air, a contractor who had once done work for us, and said in a tone meant to slide under my defenses, "You remember how that went, right?" It was a memory dagger. Small, precise, meant to say I had vulnerabilities he could exploit. I answered with a plain voice that hid the calendar of rage I kept. "Thank you for confirming," and I walked away before he could see the set of my jaw. I tucked the phone into my clutch where my fingers would find it later. The recording would be Exhibit B. The facts were cold. The feeling afterward was colder, like stepping into air that had been emptied of oxygen. His presence was now a device, and I had to treat him like evidence, not a man. I stopped being patient with pain and started being impatient with solutions. The shift from endurance to engineering happened in the small motions after that bar conversation. A text to Nora that read only, Plan Indigo. Venue AV access needed. 3 hours, and the way my hands worked the run-of show in my head like a locksmith. I photographed the printed schedule on the AV table, menus, toast order, last call queues, and I made note of Casey's rhythm, how he scrolled through his tablet between speeches, and how he left his tablet unattended for a few minutes at a time. I introduced myself to Casey with a neutral line about offering a surprise clip for the couple, and his guard dropped with the practiced civility of an MC who'd learned to trust optimism. He gave me a 5-minute window to load a file onto the laptop. I used that window to test a thumbnail to see which input the projector preferred and whether the laptop kept a recent files list that an alert hand could swap. I made a map in my head: projector, HDMI, tablet backup, a path for a QR to be visible, then an exit for Lily. Nora replied with one word and an emoji. "Ready?" I verified the projector input ports quietly, noting which cords were loose and which were taped. I rehearsed how to ask Casey for a test and how to cue the slide without drawing suspicion. I cued an alternate route. If the laptop was pulled, Casey's tablet would be the fallback. I checked my phone battery and the battery in the clutch, then I practiced the 2 lines I would say if cornered, one for public clarity, one to Lily if voices spiked. The change in me was subtle but absolute. It was like lowering a scope and seeing measurement instead of emotion. I felt calmer because I had options organized like tools in a box: legal, technological, theatrical, and each one fit precisely into the plan I was starting to assemble. Victor was the kind of presence that made the air around him feel like it had been measured for a trap. I watched him step into conversations not with charm but with the steady certainty of someone accustomed to outcomes. From behind a floral screen, I caught him leaning over Ben, saying something low, and if his words were meant to be private, they weren't private enough for me. I recorded the exchange on a tiny voice memo, under the rule that if he was going to build a story, he should be on record for it. Victor's voice was steady. "We paper over the inspection issue later," he said, and his tone assumed complicity. Ben's reply was less steady. It showed under the words, "We can't certify cash that doesn't exist." The tremor in his voice was a human thing that betrayed the legislarility they tried to project. Ben's hands kept finding the edge of the table as if searching for purchase. I edged closer and noticed details that told me information they didn't intend to give away. The folder in Ben's hand had a term sheet with names of Shell limited liability companies that I'd seen in Daniel's emails before. Victor's phone was on the table, a calendar invite titled Close, the kind of shorthand men like him know to make invisible to ordinary eyes. Ben's shoulders had a tilt of fatigue that might have been posture if not for the way his eyes flicked toward the terrace, like someone measuring escape. I took photographs of the pages with my phone and sent them securely to my account. I labeled the audio pressure call 1 WAV and stamped the time in a notebook. Ben's lips moved in apology when we crossed paths later. "I'm sorry," he mouthed, and I held that image like a hinge. I didn't shame him in public. I catalogued his cracks. It's easier to persuade someone to help you if you can make their options clearer than their threats. On the AV table, a stack of cue cards sat like a prop table left by a director. I picked them up with fingers that didn't shake and read the lines printed in the same serif font used in the program. The script had been written for forgiveness and optics, not for truth. Under Mom's name, the line read, "Ruth has learned to forgive and stop exaggerating." Under Dad's name, "Families can move on when daughters do." Under Mark's, "Thank you, Daniel, for believing in me when my own sister didn't." The words sat in a row like trapdoors with velvet tops. Someone had pre-written my erasure so it would look like compassion. My name was a punctuation point in their narrative. The comma that signaled it was time to close the sentence on the past. I slid each card back into the pile and memorized the sequence, not because I wanted to rehearse their humiliation, but because I needed to be ready for it and to document it. The betrayal was pre-planned and budgeted. There were sticky notes on the run-of show that timed where the family lines would land in the program and an order indicating when Daniel might be handed the mic. The staging was clinical. Applause, pause, then the soft pivot to talk about healing. I found a note scrawled in Mom's handwriting, "Keep it light," and under it a separate note in Mark's pen. "Yield to Daniel at 9:52. It was obvious now that they weren't improvising forgiveness, they were producing it. I tucked the cards back, took a deep breath, and let the quiet of my inventory settle into resolve. I would not be gaslit into silence. I would gather evidence, set my pieces, and wait until the room was ready to hear the truth instead of another rehearsed kindness. Mark gives a toast that reads like a business pitch wrapped in family language. He talks about taking risks, about the support of allies, and then he thanks a friend who stepped up when people wouldn't. When he hands Daniel the mic, the room does something collective and stupid. It assumes the arc has closed. Daniel speaks about integrity and second chances and watches me as if he's handing me absolution with both hands. He tells a story, smiling at some private memory, and everyone laughs where they're supposed to. The word Ruth appears in the sentences like a punctuation, always next to terms like overreaction, misunderstanding, and unfortunate litigation. The laughter that follows makes the sound of scissors. Clean, practiced, meant to cut. I move because that's what I do now. I stand and step forward even as Casey eyes me, uncertain, and the mic input flickers under Mom's gaze. Mom keeps smiling, the kind of smile that says she has already decided the narrative. Dad's jaw tightens, a tiny mechanical motion. The room watches me the way people watch a weather report, curious, a little bored, hungry for the next pleasant line. I put my hand on the mic stand, the metal cool under my palm. Casey looks to Mom, who shakes her head minutely. He kills my mic as if I were feedback. The sound dies like a switch flipped. I can hear the cut in the way conversations resume in a different key, like a hall with lights down a notch. Daniel delivers the most poisonous line as if he's doing me a favor. "I forgive you, Ruth," he says, soft and blurring the direction of blame. It sounds like mockery in a velvet box. I take Lily's small hand under the table, her fingers press back, quick and sure. She looks at me with the expression she gets when she's afraid but has decided to be brave because she learned that from me. I squat so my face is level with hers and say, "Watch me." My voice is low and even. I do not argue. I do not shout. I do not make the scene they want to pin on me. I raise my phone and start recording. The red dot is a private witness. My thumb clicks a timestamp in the Notes app. I angle the lens to catch the faces on the dais. Mom's practiced softness, Dad's shallow breath, Mark's fixed smile, Daniel's easy smugness. People lean forward to listen to the speakers again, and the room collects every ordinary sound: silverware on plates, a child laughing at a joke, the hum of the HVAC into a background for the performance. I record those ordinary noises because context matters later. I let the camera sit so the file captures the exact sequence of pauses, the places where applause eclipses words, and the moments where people glance away. I am surgical about angle, from slightly below so the projector light doesn't wash everything out, wide enough to include both Daniel and the family table, close enough to catch the tremor in Ben's hand at the back when he thinks no one is watching. I walk to the terrace like I'm heading to a quiet room to take a call. My heels click on the wood floor, a metronome for the pulse in my neck. The air outside is sharp with night. The jasmine smell is the kind that makes your eyes sting. I breathe through it, check the recording still rolling, and send a 3-word text to Nora. They went public. She answers with a single capitalized emoji and a time, green. 9:58. I snap a photo of the terrace door with the phone set to show the time in the corner. Evidence likes ordinary things: timestamps, ambient noise, the casual consistency that proves something is not staged later. Back inside, the online reaction begins to ripple. Someone at a back table posts a clip. There is a laugh in it and a caption that calls me dramatic. Another guest uploads a shortened clip to a contractor group. Ben texts me, "I'm sorry, and we didn't want this." The messages, short and shaky, are the sound of people who know they didn't do right but are trying to keep living. Victor's reflection passes in the glass of the terrace door. He mouths checkmate and then covers it with a smile that isn't for me. I upload the full, unedited file into my secure folder, watching the progress bar inch across the screen like a heartbeat. I generate a hash on the file. I record the checksum in my notebook. Small rituals, boring and precise, that mean the file cannot be altered without leaving a trace. I message Aaron, timestamp 21:07. Execute packet A if needed. He replies, standing by. I save copies of the video to 2 cloud backups and to an encrypted external drive in my bag. That drive is the same weight as a brick and feels ridiculous in a clutch at a wedding, but sometimes practicality is an ugly accessory. I make a list in the Notes app of everyone who laughed, who clapped, who looked away, who touched Daniel's arm in a way that suggested comfort, not distance. I know every face at the family table because I've counted them in rehearsal. This is inventory, not vengeance. I draft an email to the bank contact with the subject line that will get their attention: time-sensitive, public controversy. I do not send it yet. Documentation must be orderly. Evidence must be stacked in a way that a third party can see the logic without needing to like the person presenting it. The immediate echo moves faster than the people at the head table think. Clips spread to private chats and local forums. A contractor page that has 20,000 followers posts a short video that gets 100 comments in minutes. People mislabel the moment as scandal and gossip. Some are sympathetic, some cruel. The speed is dizzying and satisfying in equal measure because speed makes denial harder. While the room tries to decide whether they saw what they saw, I keep working. I save each copy of the clip with a file name that tells me where it came from. Table clip back left 21:07, MP4. So later, if anyone says this wasn't recorded from the floor, the file names will prove otherwise. As guests murmur and the band tucks into a slower song, I watch Mom leave the table with a face that looks like porcelain cracked at the eye. She presses her palm to her throat and counts breaths. Dad stands a long time and then takes his seat like gravity had more pull than he expected. Mark's smile falters only when someone asks him a question that cannot be answered with a rehearsed phrase. I do not gloat. I do not storm the stage. My victory is a quiet thing at that moment, the ability to present the honest sequence and know someone outside their circle will believe the record. I copy the server timestamps, I lock the files, and I make phone calls that sound like paperwork calls, not triumphant calls. The night is still a wedding, full of small private kindnesses and clumsy dancing, but somewhere under the music, the engine of their plan has stalled. Lily watches me with an expression like a child who has seen an adult become a different kind of strong. She squeezes my hand and says, "Was that him?" I nod. She leans her head against my shoulder and breathes out like a relief. Her smallness acts as a thermometer for everything I do. If what I planned would make her safer, then it is worth the world. I tuck her hair behind her ear and send Nora one final text. If they try anything online, drop the mirror site. The server pings almost at once with a time-stamped confirmation. I fold my hands in my lap and let the room rearrange itself around the truth I planted. I do not celebrate. I do not let myself imagine the aftermath too far out. I stay anchored in the work, document, preserve, and keep Lily safe. The rest will follow from that. The timeline had to be tight. I gave myself a 3-hour window that night to seize the room and trigger the mechanisms I'd lined up. I built a second window of 72 hours for legal filings and bank reviews to take effect without allowing time for coordinated denials. Metrics mattered: funding freeze, contract collapse through the morals clause, a triggering of non-disclosure agreement penalties if they used my sealed records, and a public shift in power where my brother's company could no longer hide behind Daniel. Fail-safes were mundane and necessary. Dual cloud backups for every file, a mirrored website on a separate host, an encrypted external drive in my bag, and a paper copy of the critical affidavit tucked into the bottom of my clutch. I kept a checklist: evidence live, legal filings queued, process servers ready, bank contact warned. The whole thing felt like setting a clockwork watch. Each gear had to engage in the right order. I wrote the objectives so Aaron, my attorney, could read them without needing to translate emotion into law. He read them once and said, "This is solid, we can work with this." The constraint about custody made him nod the hardest. We both agreed that any trace of aggression would push courts to favor a man who'd play the victim card, so every action had to be documented, lawful, and surgical. I told Lily in the simplest terms. We keep the rules and use the paper. She squeezed my hand like she understood a promise could be a plan. I slept for 20 minutes that afternoon in a chair at the venue just to feel the chairs under me and to smell the linen and know the texture of the room I would take. That small rest made the day feel manageable, like a long run broken into timed stretches. I was no longer enduring, I was executing. Aaron went through the divorce paperwork with an analyst's eye and a plain voice. The non-disclosure agreement and the non-disparagement clause were real, and they were a weapon Daniel could point at me. But they were also a legal string with knots that, if pulled correctly, would entangle him. He identified Clause 12, Paragraph C, non-disparagement, and Paragraph 5, Section D, no use of private financial data, along with the liquidated damages figure we had been given in the divorce. $75,000 per breach. Aaron laid out how a breach would look in plain terms: if Daniel or anyone acting on his behalf released my sealed financial records or used them to leverage a deal that triggered damages and potential court orders. We drafted a complaint and a demand letter that night and left blanks for time-specific exhibits that I would add after the event. We also prepared a notice alleging interference with contracts, plain language that any judge would understand. Someone intentionally used private records to influence a deal. Aaron prepared a preservation notice to Barnett Construction and to entities connected to Daniel, legal language that told them not to destroy documents or risk obstruction. We set up on-call process servers for a narrow window around the presentation. Aaron kept a stack of ready-to-file documents labeled Packet A and Packet B, and we agreed he would file electronically the moment I told him the first recording had played. He taught me to say the filing queue in one sentence so there was no mistake. Timestamp 39, file Packet A. He also agreed to keep communications cold and professional so the record would speak legally, not emotionally. I built myself a deal map the way I used to build spreadsheets, columns of name, interest, leverage, and risk. I approached the chief financial officer, Ben, on the terrace under the pretense of small talk. Once we were out of earshot, I said, "I know about Civic West Phase 2 and the convertible note." He went pale in that soft evening light. I promised two things: I would keep him out of criminal exposure, and I would work to keep the workers paid as long as he cooperated. It was a deal pitched in the language he understood: mitigation, not threats. Ben showed me a term sheet that confirmed my worst suspicions: a convertible note with warrants that would let Daniel convert debt into equity, and an explicit morals clause requiring no pending public controversy before closing. In practice, that meant a single public scandal would terminate the deal automatically. Ben admitted under quiet pressure that he had been told to backdate receivables and that there had been conversations about softening inspection reports to make things look cleaner than they were. He signed an affidavit for me on his phone. I recorded the signing with a chain of custody video, his pen on paper, the time stamp, his voice reading the line aloud. He kept the original. I had a verified copy and the video. That affidavit would be a hinge in the work I planned. The morals clause was fragile and precise, and in my hands it was a lever. As the plan took shape, evidence assembly became an act of devotion. I cataloged Exhibit A as the family table clip where Mom, Dad, and Mark attached my name to overreaction and where Daniel sat smiling. Exhibit B was Daniel at the bar, the recording of his thinly veiled threats about documents and dates, the one I made him confirm so casually. Exhibit C was Victor's pressure audio, the voice memo in which he told Ben, "We paper over the inspection issue later." I created short, plain summaries for each exhibit so anyone who opened the packet could understand the import without a law degree. Who said what, when, and how it connected to the deal. Nora helped with technology that turned chaos into chain of custody. She mirrored everything to two separate cloud accounts, stamped each file with a synchronized time code, and generated a hash for every file so we could prove later that no edits had been made. We exported metadata and saved it in comma-separated value files that Aaron could drop into a complaint. We also made physical backups, an encrypted external drive labeled in code and a sealed envelope with copies of the most critical exhibits, stamped with a notary's mark and kept with a trusted courier. I asked Nora to build a small, read-only site with a table of contents, exhibits, short summaries, and legal notices. She time-stamped the deployment log so if anyone tried to claim the site was a fabrication, the log would say otherwise. I printed QR codes that connected to the read-only site and made a plan to flash one on the projector. Evidence in plain words, evidence with fingerprints, evidence with timestamps, each piece stacked to make the story clear without needing my voice to prove it. I lined up my bank and regulator triggers in the same plain way I did everything else. I had a compliance contact at the bank who owed me a favor for a small loan I'd helped a mutual client file months before. I sent a heads-up package that mapped shell transfers to named accounts and linked them to prior consent decrees that Daniel's firm had signed elsewhere. My subject line was simple and time-sensitive so it wouldn't disappear into the usual inbox clutter. Time-sensitive compliance risk documentation enclosed. I attached a summary and said plainly that public controversy might be triggered around 10 p.m. and to please watch for my proof in hand. Aaron also sent a short note to the City Procurement and Ethics Office with Exhibit C summarized, a warning about inspection concealment that suggested a public safety risk. I knew that agencies respond to clear, narrow facts, so I wrote the attachment to point to specific possible violations without hyperbole. The plan included an automatic send at 10:05 p.m. if the bank had not paused transfers. That way, if they delayed action, the documents would go out and the funding triggers would be hard to ignore. Process servers were on call between 9:50 and 10:05 p.m. in plain black suits pretending to be venue staff so service could happen without creating a spectacle. Everything was timed to punish delay, not to create chaos. If the bank froze the transfer based on the early proof, the rest would be paperwork. If they didn't, the process servers and the evidence site would make sure the world saw why the pause should have happened. The goal was tidy and cruel in its efficiency: make their choices visible and then let the legal machinery hold them to account. Nora set a 10-minute throttle on the venue Wi-Fi so no one could upload a counter video or a smear fast enough to drown out the truth. She told me, "You'll have a window," and that small certainty steadied me. The plan relied on attention, 20 minutes where all eyes could be pulled to a single screen, and then a second where the internet either amplified or stuttered. I rehearsed the motion of loading the file into Casey's playlist, of asking for a test run in the lull between toasts, of appearing to be sentimental while actually positioning a lever. If the laptop disappeared, I had the tablet fallback. Casey's device could mirror to the projector via a simple adapter if I kept his attention long enough to hand it back mid-toast. I practiced 2 jokes to keep the mood light while my slide queued, and I practiced the one-line explanation I would use if someone tried to stop me: short, factual, impossible to twist into drama. I taped a small QR code to the inside page of my clutch in case I needed to flash it on the screen as proof. The QR linked to the evidence site Nora had mirrored. I carried an encrypted external drive in another pouch, dull and heavy, and I checked it again like a talisman. I didn't want to move fast, I wanted to move inevitable. The projector is a blunt instrument, it gives images authority. I was going to give evidence the same authority. Nora published the evidence site on a host that kept logs like a ledger, timestamps, file hashes, and an access log that would show when anyone hit a link. She mirrored the site to a second host in a different country and sent the deployment logs to Aaron so they could be attached to a complaint if needed. The front page was intentionally unflashy: table of contents, exhibits, short summaries, legal notices, and download links with timestamps next to them. We kept the language plain on purpose. People who needed to act didn't have time for fancy. Nora also seeded the link in places that would make it hard to bury. A contractor forum, an ethics watchdog account, and a direct email blast to the guest list we had scraped from the seating chart QR. The blast was staged to go out simultaneous to the projector queue if the bank needed proof in hand. We had redundancy: mirror sites, social posts ready in drafts, and a few allied accounts queued to amplify with a single click. I hated the idea of shouting, but I liked the idea of an honest megaphone. The site logged every hit, and Nora sent me a screenshot of the server's audit trail, an ugly string of numbers and timestamps that made me feel calm because it would later prove sequence and timing. Documents had to be easy to consume. An investigator could click, read an exhibit, and see the chain of custody. That was deliberate. If the bank or regulators wanted to ignore gossip, they couldn't ignore a well-documented packet with notarized backups. The servers were 2 men in dark suits who looked like any other hired hand at an event where people wore black. They had been briefed to blend in and to move with the flow, but their timing was everything. I had asked them to position themselves opposite each other on the dance floor, one near the band, one near the bar, so service could happen without a commotion. The choreography was boring and precise. On the second slide, when the morbid clause text appeared in large type, each server would step forward and say the same thing in the same calm voice. "Mr. Cross, you've been served," and "Mr. Barnett, you have a preservation notice." The envelope would be presented, photos snapped, and a time-stamped image uploaded to our secured cloud. The act of being served in public is designed to be humiliating. I wanted it to be factual instead. They practiced the line delivery so it sounded like venue staff, not spectacle. If anyone tried to stop them, the server's briefcases contained the legal affidavits and a contact number Aaron had authorized them to use. The idea was to remove drama from service and add documentation. Each service included a photo of the person being served, a geotag, and the server's signature. I asked for 2 copies, one for Aaron and one that would be uploaded to the evidence site immediately. The timing was synchronized to the slide change. The precise moment when the clause appeared would be the exact moment the bank saw the first proof email if the bank wanted to act. This was not theater for humiliation. It was a legal hinge I needed to swing open. I had cultivated an alternative even before that night. There's room in every bargain for someone to say no to the corrosive option and yes to a cleaner path. I reached out to a women-led turnaround fund I'd vetted for months. They do community projects and measure returns in jobs preserved as much as dollars. I presented a short-term sheet. Bridge financing to Barnett Construction for payroll and immediate supplier payments on the condition Daniel was excluded. Ben remained as CFO with full audit authority for the transition. And Mark signed a public ethics commitment and an apology acknowledging my role in stabilizing the company. The terms were intentionally simple and ethical, and the fund liked that clarity. I secured a $50,000 email commitment that would hold for 48 hours if Mark publicly accepted the conditions that night. It was a cheap life preserver in capital terms, but a public declaration in optics. I sent Olivia a discreet text with the one-line summary and a note. "If you want to save the company without him, this is real." She replied quickly, "If it helps the workers and keeps the company, I'll back it." Ben, after our terrace conversation and his affidavit, was willing to sign the audit clause and the transitional terms. The alternative was designed to be simple. Choose a rescue that excluded the man who had been the problem, or choose ruin with him. That clarity in front of a room full of witnesses forces a choice that's easy to understand and hard to unmake. Everything I did that night was measured first against one question: does it make Lily safer? Our safety rules shaped my emotional discipline. I briefed her in the car on the way to the venue using language she could hold. If voices rise, we go to the dessert table and stay by the chocolate fountain until I text you. We practiced hiding a thumb drive in the lining of my clutch. She laughed at the absurdity and then took it seriously. She wore the bracelet I'd given her, the one with a tiny star, and I asked her to touch it if she felt scared. That touch became our silent anchor. Nora had a code word she'd text if anything online escalated. Aaron had a list of emergency numbers he would call if a judge needed to act fast. I taught Lily a neutral phrase to use if anyone said something mean about me in front of her: "Please stop." And we practiced the tone so it sounded like a boundary, not a meltdown. I checked the practicalities an hour before action. Phone battery at 90%, backup battery at full, shoes comfortable enough to move in quickly, and a tiny kit in the clutch with water, Band-Aids, and 2 printed copies of a short note that said who she could go to if I was pulled away. I wrote my 3-line script on a napkin and folded it twice: the public line, the legal line, and the safety line. Habit meant I said my 3 lines once in the car like prayer. Emotional discipline is trainable. I practiced the pause in my voice that would keep me from being baited. If someone called me names or tried to paint me as unstable, I would not respond. I would operate in documented steps and keep my face and my daughter intact. When the lights went up and the slide loaded, Lily squeezed my hand and looked at me without needing a single question. Her small, steady squeeze told me I had done the right work before the night began. That felt like victory in the way that matters. I kept breathing, kept my face neutral, and kept the plan, paperwork, backup, safety at the center of everything I said and did. I scanned the room one last time like a conductor checking the orchestra. Mom sat at the family table with a posture that spoke of practice: shoulders back, smile in place. Dad held his champagne glass with that slow, careful grasp he uses when he wants to look in control. Mark was luminous in the way people are before a mistake. Olivia leaned into him, the new wife who still believed a family could be neat. Daniel laughed at a private joke and the sound landed like a bell. Victor's jaw was set. Ben kept his hands folded on the table as if to hide them. I nodded at Lily. Her fingers found the bracelet I'd given her, the little star catching the projector light. She squeezed my hand like a secret. The motion of taking the mic was casual because I'd practiced casual. I stepped up to the stage as if I belonged there, because I do. The mic felt cool under my palm. "I'm Ruth," I said into the room in a voice that's come to know steady. The operator hesitated and then this time let the feed go. The first slide clicked onto the screen. Barnett Construction X Cross Capital Morals Clause, no pending public controversy pre-closing. The chatter dimmed into a hum and then into a silence that pulled tight like a drawn curtain. I didn't look for sympathy or outrage, I looked for focus. I promised I wouldn't ruin the wedding, I said simply. I intend to save the company instead. The line landed with the strange, clear sound of truth. I tapped the remote. An audio waveform slid up the screen and the room leaned forward because we all have an old hunger for a story revealed. Daniel's voice filled the hall with a confidence that used to intimidate me in private rooms and now just sounded small when recorded. We stick the landing tonight, no noise. After that, we paper over the inspection issue. The waveform spiked and carried every inflection, every smug pause. Victor's voice followed, lower, clipped. Find the cash or find a new job. The words were not mine, they were theirs. I let them speak. The projector also showed short transcribed clips, Mom saying, Ruth has learned to forgive and stop exaggerating, Dad saying, when daughters do, families can move on, Mark saying something that read like a press release. Thank you, Daniel, for believing when others didn't. The words sat there, clinical and undeniable. Beside them on the slide was the clause that made the deal fragile, automatic termination upon public scandal. I kept my voice even and let the recorded voices do the work. Silence can be surgical. It frames what's played as fact rather than accusation. Phones rose like a field of small lights as I slid in a QR code to the evidence site. People scanned it with the mechanical curiosity we use when something shiny is offered. Casey looked at me with a new attention that had moved beyond performative kindness. He had no idea he'd handed me the theater of the truth. My phone buzzed. Aaron, file packet A now. I thumbed the confirmation and felt the file click in the world outside the hall. A second later, the process server by the band stepped forward like any slightly impatient staffer and said, calm and precise, Mr. Cross, you've been served. The sentence landed like a bell. Another server approached Mark and presented a preservation notice. Photos were taken, geotags stamped, and the images uploaded to the evidence cloud. There was a flutter at the family table like a small creature startled. Daniel's face went from a smile to a drainage of color, his laugh cut off as if someone had taken a hand to the sound. Ben's hand moved toward his mouth and then froze, his eyes were wide and too honest. A ping from the bank came through on my phone a second later, an automated header preview that Hazel, my contact, had promised me would hit if she saw probable cause. RE. Immediate pause, cross capital / Barnett Construction. The projected screen flashed a redacted portion of that email and you could see the steam of confusion rise in some faces. Daniel lunged for the laptop as if speed could undo procedure. The MC's tablet had already mirrored my slide. There was nothing for him to grab at the podium except the residue of what had been shown. Victor reached for his phone, dialing, then stopped when he found no signal. Nora had throttled the venue's network for 10 minutes, long enough for a truth to set and for reaction to be forced into the room rather than scattered online. Security moved toward Daniel the way a ship's crew moves to tie a line, practiced and necessary. No one approached me. My phone vibrated. Aaron filed emergency hearing Monday. Request for temporary restraining order in process. Another ping from Nora, mirror site live, hits, 2300. The hall smelled suddenly of citrus from spilled champagne and of dinner held too long under tension. Guests muttered, some stood up to look. A journalist at the back typed fast with the small, deadly calm of a person who knows a story when it walks in wearing a tux. The projector flashed a follow-up slide I hadn't made pretty. The alternate term sheet for an ethical bridge. It was plain text. Bridge financing if cross-capital is excluded. Ben retained with audit authority. Mark issues public apology. The screen had a 60-second countdown in the corner, a ridiculous mechanical challenge that turns public negotiation into a hard binary. The room watched the numbers tick down. Olivia, standing at Mark's side, stepped forward and said, voice steady, I support the ethical bridge. Ben lifted his hand like someone emerging from anesthesia and said, so do I. Mom reached for Dad's hand and gripped it as if for reassurance. Dad's mouth worked, looking less like a well-practiced smile and more like someone learning new words for the first time. Daniel tried to reclaim the narrative. He called me unstable and threw the old divorce non-disparagement in the air like a weapon. I had expected this. A new slide popped up beside the audio transcript showing the NDA clauses, the specific paragraphs, and the liquidated damages total. The law was now a visible number on the screen, not a threat. Aaron's name pinged my phone, securing TRO on contact and data use as we speak. The audience read the words and then read the numbers. The bank's email preview remained on the screen as a header. The process server's photos were shown beside it. It felt to me like the room was reading a ledger of choices they had all made. Security escorted Daniel to the exit with a perfunctory courtesy that masked the speed of what was happening. Victor followed him, phone to ear, jaw set like someone making a list of losses. As they left, a ripple of cameras and phones remained behind, and the murmur of conversation turned into a hush of people trying to read what had been done and what it would mean. Mark was pale, and then he was not. He took the mic with hands that shook just enough to let everyone know this was not a practiced gesture. "Ruth," he said, and the word sounded like a question. "I'm sorry. I choose the bridge." His apology was raw, it was public, it mattered. I didn't savor any of it. I only noted facts, the bank pause, the filed complaint, the process server's timestamps, the mirror site hits increasing. Lily leaned into me and whispered, "Did we win?" I squeezed her hand back and said, "We made the right call." Her eyes were bright with the kind of relief that comes slow and then all at once. I closed the presentation with a photograph of her hand in mine, the only face I wanted on the screen. The projector blinked to a soft slide that read, simply, "Documentation will follow." Then I stepped off the stage and into a room that would never view me the same way again. It felt odd to watch my own work spread like a map. I wasn't looking for likes. I was looking for confirmation that the chain of custody we'd layered would speak to people who mattered: the bank compliance officers, the ethics investigators, the construction lenders. The evidence site was plain and boring on purpose: exhibits with timestamps, short summaries, and downloadable notarized. There's a kind of power in plainness because it looks like a tool, not a spectacle. The journalist at the back table photographed the slide and the evidence site and typed a headline that would show up in my feed later. "Wedding reveal freezes funding." Comments layered in. Someone from a contractor page wrote, "We depend on payroll, this matters," and another added, "If this is true, workers get priority." The tenor of the room shifted from gossip to consequence. Mom's face went through small changes. Surprise, then the mask of concern, then a guarded attempt at composure. Dad looked like someone who'd been asked a question he hadn't prepared an answer for. Mark's eyes searched faces like he was trying to find a friend in a room suddenly full of strangers. Olivia, newly wed and still learning the contours of his family, stepped away from Mark to look at the screen. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady. "We can do the bridge." That was the moment when the room collectively understood it was a choice more consequential than any toast. People began to murmur in real language, "If he goes, can they save the jobs? Who funds the bridge? What does Ben know?" The questions were precise because the evidence was precise. I set the alternative plainly on the screen. A short, simple term sheet outlining the bridge financing conditions. It read like a clear contract, not a plea. I gave them a minute and then started a 60-second countdown on the projector because public timelines force choices out of vague intentions. The numbers ticked down and something like a hush settled, as though the room had to decide before the clock ran out. Ben, who'd been pale and small for most of the night, stood up and said, hoarse and honest, "I can live with the bridge and an audit." He'd already signed his affidavit on my phone. He'd seen his name in a packet of proof, and the moral clarity of keeping workers paid apparently mattered to him in the end. People watched Mark longer than they watched the numbers. You could see the old instincts on his face, something like survival, then shame, then the slow dawning of responsibility. He stepped up to the mic as if the room had suddenly become a courtroom that required his testimony. "I'm sorry," he said, not the polished line from earlier, but a real, messy apology. "I thought keeping the company afloat with support was protecting people. I didn't think about what it cost Ruth." The sentence landed like a soft hand on a harsh wound. His choice to accept the bridge was not a love letter to me, it was an act that put the company's survival in a public place where we could insist on accountability. Olivia's nod at his side was small but steady. She'd made a quick calculation of what mattered. Her presence, her willingness to back the alternative mattered a lot in the room. Daniel's response was immediate, the reflex of a man whose leverage was slipping. He tried to pull the old playbook out of his pocket, call me unstable, cast me as revenge-driven, remind the room of legal threats. "She's acting out," he said at first, loud enough for people to hear. He quoted the non-disparagement clause like a threat. But the slide that had the NDA's exact paragraphs and the running liquidated damages number sat there like a fact in black font. Aaron had taught me how to present the clauses plainly so they couldn't be waved away as technicalities. A running total of what misusing my sealed records would cost, numbers in dollars, made the room read the consequences as currency, not just words. The bank's reaction came faster than I'd dared hope. Hazel, my contact in compliance, sent a brief email confirming an immediate pause on Cross Capital's wire pending internal review. The preview showed on my phone and then on the projector as one of the slides, a simple header, RE, immediate pause Cross Capital / Barnett Construction. The sight of it felt like a lever slotted into place. The hush in the room deepened. Victor, who had been watching like a man who expected to count his winnings, stood and leaned toward Daniel as if to say, "We can fix this." Victor's phone calls were met with the ring of lines that didn't connect. Nora's timed throttle had bought me the seconds needed for the bank to commit to patience. Then the process servers moved like trained props and the public nature of service did what it always does. It made the legal immediate. The servers stepped through a crowd frozen in the same moment they'd been gathered for a party and handed over envelopes in a tone that was flat and precise. Photos were snapped, geotags confirmed, and the images uploaded to the mirrors Nora had spun up. I watched one of Daniel's spokesmen try to argue that the documents were served improperly and then watched the photos in the cloud timestamped 5 seconds earlier prove otherwise. It was a small, sharp satisfaction to see procedure function the way it's meant to, orderly and truthful. By morning, the bank's freeze had stuck. The compliance officer confirmed a full internal review and a hold on releasing funds until documents were vetted. The city procurement office emailed back that they had received my heads-up and would open an inquiry into the inspection and permitting concerns I'd flagged. A contractor group that had blacklisted Cross Capital the night before sent a notice to suppliers advising caution and urging them to verify funding before delivering materials. Ben's affidavit had prompted at least one supplier to pause shipments until their own invoices could be confirmed. The contractor community's reaction mattered in a practical way. When suppliers pause, so do projects, and when projects pause, leverage shifts away from the investor who was trying to buy goodwill with a family reunion. In the first 72 hours, the noise around us clarified into paperwork. Aaron filed the complaint and the preservation notices. The court stamped them in a way that felt like a church bell, visible and immutable. A temporary restraining order was sought to prevent Daniel from contacting me, from using or sharing any of my sealed materials, and from approaching Lily. The request was granted quickly enough to give me a breathing space I hadn't expected to get so fast. It meant I could answer messages and move without fear of a man using the legal system as a hammer. Mark convened a board meeting the next morning and confirmed he would accept outside bridge financing with the ethics conditions attached. He issued a short public apology to our extended network, an awkward, earnest statement that read like someone learning to speak responsibility aloud. Ben was given interim audit authority and promised a full accounting. Olivia's family lawyer reached out to my attorney not to attack but to ask about indemnities and corporate exposure. She wanted distance between her new family and Cross Capital, and she wanted the workers covered. The city's ethics office opened a file that would eventually draw lines between permits, inspections, and whoever had tried to make them appear less fraught than reality. At home, my inbox filled with everything from supportive notes to furious messages from people who had once called our house their map. Mom left voicemails tight with frustration. Dad sent emails with a tone meant to sound conciliatory while still trying to preserve old alliances. I saved them all into a folder I labeled Family Communications and refused to answer in the first 72 hours because I wanted my responses to be measured and not reflexive. Nora kept the sites live and mirrored. Aaron kept the filings clean and procedural. Lily asked once if anyone would be mad at her in school because of what happened. I told her honestly that some people would be confused and a few might be cruel, but that we had chosen the right thing for our safety and the workers' pay. She hugged me and seemed to understand in a way children do, not the full weight but the right shape of it. Those first days were a lot of small victories and some tasks that required patience. I slept in 20-minute bursts and made coffee by the pot. I filed copies of everything in physical folders, burned a few CDs as backups the way an old person burns playlists, and checked the evidence hashes Nora had given me like a parent looking at a child's face after a fever. The most immediate change was practical. I could finally stop walking into rooms expecting to be erased. The legal notices in hand meant that people who wanted to hide things had to choose a new path, and that choice was visible to everyone who mattered. Extended family divided along old lines by morning's second cup of coffee. Some cousins messaged congratulations, a few aunts sent thinly veiled rebukes. The cousin who once invited me to her book club wrote, "You could have handled this differently," and left it at that, the kind of judgment that comes without context. A handful of relatives reached out privately to say they'd been curious for a long time but hadn't wanted to pry. Others sent links to op-eds arguing I'd gone too far. I stopped explaining. I sent links to the evidence site and let the records speak. It felt cleaner to let the facts do the work. I refused any meetings that included Daniel or anyone who claimed ignorance as an excuse. That boundary was non-negotiable. Mark's board convened a tight meeting and confirmed the bridge financing with the ethics conditions in place. Ben, who had looked hollowed out the night before, was given audit authority and a mandate to make a public accounting. Suppliers started to call Ben to verify invoices. A few paused shipments until they saw the bank hold confirmed. Olivia's family lawyer reached out to Aaron to review any marital exposure. The answer was clean by design, but the question itself signaled a needed distance between Olivia and Daniel. I released a single, calm paragraph to the press. "We documented, we acted." That was the only public line I gave. I didn't want a press tour or a vindication party. I wanted to make sure payroll kept running and that the company had a path forward without the man who'd used us for leverage. Daniel's counsel opened settlement talks, offering to resolve the non-disparagement claims quietly. Aaron told me to let it sit. He wanted the offers in writing. The initial offer was an attempt at quiet money and a confidentiality wrapper. Aaron countered with the liquidated damages figure and a consent decree that required a temporary restraining order enjoining Daniel from contacting me or using any of my sealed materials. The court granted a temporary restraining order quickly enough to give me breathing room, no contact, no data use, and no third-party smears while the matter moved toward a hearing. That order felt like a physical thing I could wear, lightweight but protective. The complaint grew as Ben submitted a sworn affidavit describing pressure to backdate receivables and misstate cash flow. Regulators opened inquiries into permitting and inspection irregularities. The bank's compliance department expanded its review beyond the single transfer and started a formal inquiry into the shell entities we'd flagged. The Ethical Bridge Fund executed its initial wire to cover the immediate payroll and supplier invoices. That money kept workers on site and quiet in a practical, humane way. Mark signed a public apology and accepted the audit plan. The public settlement discussions were less about me winning than about stabilizing people's livelihoods and pushing accountability into public view. Those early legal maneuvers felt dense and transactional, but they also created space to breathe. I changed my emergency contact away from mom and dad and listed a close friend and Aaron instead. I bought 2 tickets for Lily and me to the coast for a weekend with no phones, one of those small rituals that says life continues. I kept the domain live and mirrored truth I'd learned doesn't have an expiration date. I moved my binder, the paper custody orders, the non-disclosure, the affidavits into a locked, fireproof box at the attorney's office. It stayed accessible but secure, which felt right. I could live my life without carrying the weight of it like a shackle. I locked down other small things that mattered. I changed account passwords again and put a freeze on any joint alerts. I printed copies of the key exhibits and put them into a sealed envelope in a safe deposit box we'd rented for contingencies. I made time for Lily 2 afternoons at the park, an unplanned lunch at her favorite diner, and a long walk where she could talk about school and cartoons and not about grown people's mistakes. That weekend at the shore, she asked, as children do, if we were safe. I told her, simply and true, yes, because we don't ask for permission to be. She nodded, satisfied in the way children are when a parent uses a sentence to close an anxiety. I declined the next family gathering with one line, protecting peace. It was short, clear, and left no room for negotiation. I didn't want my attendance to be treated as consent or a reset button for what had happened. There are boundaries that feel small until you realize they are the only thing that keeps you breathing. I kept the evidence site live, not to punish but to preserve a record. I walked through my days with the same quiet focus I'd brought to the wedding: document, preserve, and protect Lily. The rest, I decided, would unfold on its own timeline. If you've been publicly dismissed by your own, tell me your story in the comments. I read every one. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more family revenge stories. Keep listening, there's always a way to reclaim the room.